Welcome back to the deep dive. You know the deal here. You want to go deep on some seriously interesting stuff, and you don't have a lot of time.
Hmm.
So we try to keep things moving. This one, this one's a little different, even for us. We're dealing with a declassified CIA document today.
Yep, a declassified CIA document. And, well, it's about remote viewing.
Remote viewing, yeah.
That's right.
I mean, this stuff is, I don't even know where to begin.
Well, let's start with the basics, I guess. The document we have is a report on a remote viewing session conducted on May 22, 1984.
May 22, 1984.
Okay. And for those maybe not familiar with remote viewing, the idea is that someone can basically use their mind, their perception, to gather information about a target, a distant target, something they can't see.
Okay, makes sense. So what was the target in this case?
This is where it gets really interesting. The target for this session was Mars,
Mars.
but not just Mars.
Okay.
Mars approximately 1 million years ago. A million years ago. Okay, now we're talking. This is why I love this show. All right, so classic remote viewing setup, right? The subject gets a sealed envelope. They don't know what's inside.
Exactly. Just before the session starts.
The envelope's opened, and inside it says Mars, 1 million BC, and some specific coordinates.
That's right. It gives them a starting point, a place to focus their attention.
I got it. So what were the coordinates? Where did this all begin?
The initial coordinates were 40.89 degrees north, 9.55 degrees west.
Okay, so our remote viewer focuses on those numbers. What do they see? What's the first thing in the report?
Well, the first thing the subject perceives is a structure. It's described as being tall and kind of pyramid-shaped, and it's situated in this large, low-lying area.
A pyramid, okay.
Yeah, and they describe its color as a yellowish color, almost like ochre.
So a yellowish, ochre-colored pyramid on Mars.
A million.
1 million years ago. All right, I'm already hooked. Let's, what happens next? I mean, this is a pretty big claim right off the bat.
Right, well, the next step is to kind of zero in on the time period. The target, the million years BC. So the interviewer guides the subject to focus on that time. And when they do, there's a very noticeable shift in perception.
Okay, what do they see?
The subject starts describing, they describe these really severe clouds. More like dust storms, they said.
Yeah.
And they even use the term really weird to describe it.
Really weird, huh? So, sounds like some serious geological activity. Dust storms, maybe even a planet-wide event.
Yeah, something big happening. And at this point, they decide to go even further back in time.
Further back.
Yeah, before this major geologic problem.
Before the dust storms. Okay, I'm following you.
So they try to look at Mars before whatever this event was. And what they see is completely different.
Different how?
Well, all those mountains of dirt that appeared later are gone.
Gone, okay.
And instead of like a chaotic landscape, they see these large, flat surfaces, smooth angles.
Walls.
Walls, yeah. And the transcript really emphasizes the size. These are described as really large, megalithic structures.
Megalithic walls on a much older Mars. Okay, now things are getting really interesting. Did the remote viewer see any signs of life during this period? I mean, any people?
They did, actually. The subject reported seeing a shadow of people, very tall and thin.
A shadow.
Yeah, it's interesting. They say it was just a shadow, as if they were there and they're not there anymore, like a trace or an imprint of something that used to be present.
A shadow of tall, thin people.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously the next question is, can we see these people? Can we see them when they were there?
Of course. So they try to shift the focus to when those beings were actually present.
And
this is where things get a little murky. According to the transcript, there was a lot of what the subject called static.
Yeah,
like interference on a radio or something.
Yeah.
The images were breaking up into fragments. So it was harder to get a clear picture.
But they still saw something, right?
They did. The core description remained consistent. Very large people. And they appeared thin and tall because of their size.
Okay. And they were wearing something, right? What was it?
Some kind of strange clothes, the subject said.
Strange clothes. Interesting. Okay, so we've got these tall, thin people in strange clothes on a Mars that looks nothing like the one we know today. All right, what happens next? Does the remote viewer stay in that same location, or?
No, they actually moved to a new set of coordinates. The next location was 46.45 north, 353.22 east.
All right, and what do they see there?
This time, the subject described being deep inside of a cavern, but then corrected themselves. Not a cavern, more like a canyon.
A canyon, okay.
And they were looking up at the walls of this canyon, which they said seemed to go on forever.
Endless canyon walls.
Exactly. But that's not all. They also perceived a structure there, a place where it looked like the canyon wall itself had been carved.
Carved by?
That wasn't clear. But the subject described these huge sections of smooth stone. No intricate details, they said.
So smooth, massive structures carved right into the canyon walls. Did they go inside? Did they see what was in there?
Yeah, they asked about that. They asked if these structures had interiors and exteriors. And the subject confirmed that they did.
So what did they see inside?
They described the inside as being like a rabbit warren, corners of rooms.
Corners of rooms, okay.
And again, the emphasis was on the sheer scale of everything. The rooms were huge, with incredibly high ceilings and these really wide walls.
Huge rooms, high ceilings, wide walls. It's like they're describing some kind of ancient megacity carved into this Martian canyon.
Yeah, and then they move on again to a new location. The coordinates this time were 45.86 north, 354.1 east.
Not too far from the last spot.
Right. So at this new location, they saw something that looked like the end of a very large road. And there was this marker thing. That's how they described it.
A marker thing? What, like a sign?
No, much bigger than that. They even had a spontaneous thought, a Washington Monument overlay, they called it. So something like an obelisk.
Wow. An obelisk at the end of a massive road. You know, the scale of these perceptions is pretty mind-blowing. So where to next?
The next coordinates given were 35.26 north, 213.24 east.
All right. Another jump.
At this location, the subject described being in this huge circular basin. And it was almost entirely surrounded by mountains, very tall, ragged mountains. And again, they just kept commenting on how massive everything seems.
Everything's huge.
Yeah, that was a recurring theme throughout the session. But they also mentioned a right-angle corner to something.
They didn't elaborate.
Not really, no. It's just a brief detail.
Okay. All right. So moving right along, what about 34.6 north, 213.09 east?
At these coordinates, they saw a cluster of squares, kind of laid out in a line, but almost flush with the ground. And they were connected in some way.
Squares connected and flush with the ground. Okay, I'm picturing it.
And they were described as being very white, or at least reflective of light.
Reflective. Interesting.
And their perspective was from this oblique angle, like they were looking at it from the side.
Left to the side. Okay.
Oh, and they also mentioned that the sun looked weird.
A weird sun. That's a new one. All right, so where do we go from there?
They moved slightly to 34.57 north, 212.22 east.
Okay, not too far.
Right. And at this new location, they saw a radiating pattern.
A radiating pattern? Of what?
Well, they described it as strange intersecting kind of roads that are dug into valleys, like channels. Very neat and deep cuts, they said, all below the level of the surrounding terrain.
Dug into the valleys. Okay, so we're seeing more evidence of something that looks like intentional construction.
Yeah, potentially. And then we have another big jump. The next coordinates are 15 degrees north, 198 degrees east.
Okay, back to the other side of the planet. What's there?
This time, the subjects saw these intersecting structures. They likened them to aqueduct-type things.
Aqueducts? Like for carrying water?
Well, they specifically mentioned rounded bottom-carved channels like roadbeds. So maybe. They also saw pointed tops of something on the horizon, but they couldn't tell what they were.
Pointed tops of something. Mysterious.
Oh, and they also mentioned that the horizon itself looked weird, like it was misty and far away.
A weird horizon. Okay, that's pretty trippy. And what happens next?
The final set of coordinates provided were 80 degrees south, 64 degrees east.
80 degrees south. So down near the pole, what did they see there?
Pyramids.
Pyramids. Like the Egyptian ones?
Well, they weren't sure at first. They wondered if it was just an overlay from their own knowledge. But they confirmed that these structures had interiors and exteriors, and they were huge.
Huge pyramids near the Martian South Pole. All right, this is getting wild. So what happens inside the pyramids? Do they go in?
It seems like at this point, the interviewer kind of gave the subject more freedom to explore whatever was catching their attention. They were still getting strong perceptions, but maybe not as precise in terms of location.
I see. So they go inside one of the pyramids.
Yes. And what they see is really interesting. They perceive different chambers, but they're described as being almost completely empty. No furnishings or anything. They even compared it to a place strictly functional for sleeping or hibernations, designed to withstand really bad storms.
Shelters from storms.
Oh,
Okay, so they're inside this pyramid, this potential shelter. What about those beings? Do they see those tall, thin people again?
They do. The subject reiterates their earlier description. Very tall, very large people, but thin because of their height. And they were wearing these clothes that were described as being like silk, but not flowing, like cut to fit.
All right, so we've got these mysterious beings taking shelter in these pyramids from some kind of intense Martian storms. Where do we go from here? What's the next step in the session?
Well, this is where things get really fascinating. The interviewer instructs the subject to try to communicate with one of these beings.
To communicate. How?
It's not really clear from the transcript how the communication was supposed to happen, but the subject was asked to have the being share information about themselves.
And did they?
They did.
Yeah.
According to the report, the subject received the impression that these beings were ancient and they were dying. It's past their time or age, is what the subject said. And they were described as being very philosophical about it. Like they accepted their fate, but had tried to find a way to survive.
Unsuccessfully, it seems.
Yeah, apparently.
Okay, so we've got a dying ancient race on Mars. What was killing them? What was causing this decline?
That's a great question. The subject reported receiving this overwhelming input about the corruption of their environment, and it was happening very quickly.
So their environment was failing, but why?
Well, they described it with this image, a globe, like a planet passing through a comet's tail, or a river of something, but cosmic, like space pictures.
So something from space, a cosmic event.
That seems to be the implication, yeah.
A cosmic event that caused some kind of environmental collapse? Did they try to escape?
The subject perceived that a group of them had left to find a new place to live.
A new planet.
Maybe. They described it as a long journey. And when asked about transportation, the subject got an image of the inside of a boat. A large boat with rounded walls and shiny metal.
So they left Mars in a metal boat. Where did they go?
The perceived destination was described as a really crazy place with volcanoes and gas pockets and strange plants. Very volatile place.
Sounds rough.
Yeah, but there was a key difference. This new place had a lot of vegetation, unlike their dying homeworld.
So they traded a dying planet for a volatile one, but at least with vegetation. Did the remote viewer see what happened to them? Did they make it?
No, they didn't get that far. When asked if the being recognized the viewer, or if they felt any possibility of assistance, the response was just wait.
Just wait.
Yeah, it's like the being didn't really see the viewer or maybe interpreted the interaction as something internal, and they were waiting for the return of that group that left to find a new home.
Wow. That's heavy stuff. So let's just take a moment to summarize what we've learned.
Sure. We've just gone through a declassified CIA document detailing a remote viewing session from 1984. And what we heard was a story about an ancient civilization on Mars 1 million years ago.
A civilization with massive structures, pyramids, canyons, roads, maybe even aqueducts.
And these incredibly tall, thin beings who wore strange clothes. And then there was this environmental collapse, possibly caused by some kind of event in space.
And a desperate attempt to find a new home on another world.
A world that was volatile and dangerous, but also full of life.
And those who stayed behind are just waiting.
Waiting for news, for answers.
No, it's important to remember that this is all based on a remote viewing session. And as we always say, remote viewing is not exactly a scientifically accepted phenomenon.
Right. It's speculative, unconventional.
But it's fascinating, and it raises some really interesting questions.
Questions about the history of our solar system, the possibility of other civilizations, maybe even the potential for life beyond Earth as we know it.
Exactly. So we leave you with those questions. And we encourage you to explore them, to do your own research, to keep an open mind, and most importantly, to keep asking questions. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.